John's going to put up two images, one by Ed and one by Linda, and they're going to talk about their recent work, which some of you may be familiar with Ed's work on the internet, where he's responding to contemporary events, current events.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Well, this is my work on the end. It's a small painting. It's called Jake West. It's about 34 by 44. It's acrylic on canvas. And I guess as time has gone by, I've gone for attracted to real simple things, simple, kind of quiet and simple. And I'm a big fan of Marsden Hartley and Milton Avery. And I don't care if it looks dumb or not. I kind of like dumb. I don't like smart too much. I like dumb better than smart. So it's just, kind of like a basic narrative, but really, I mean, I guess they've kind of evolved from Western movies, but I kind of just get to where I just make them up and don't need, I mean, occasionally I'll get a gesture from somebody, but for the most part, they're just made up, and they're actually better that way. And they like to let the paint show through, so it just kind of adds a little, I guess it gives it a little different perspective. It shows it's a painting, perhaps, and a little depth of something going on. So I really want just an idea. I guess you could call it a soul sense coming forward. So really, that's about it. What I need to say about it.
Okay. Ever since I first met Linda, I have to comment on her painting quickly. I always thought that she painted like an adolescent who happened to understand Gauguin. So that was my take on her, and still is. This painting behind it is mine. It's pretty recent, out of a series. It's about 5 by 6 feet, something like that. I've been doing these things that Mark was commenting on, working on in Photoshop and putting things on email and sending them out a couple a week to about 100 or so people, whoever wants to sign up. And they're kind of a captive audience for this. It's sort of like an ongoing exhibition. And the subject is mainly, it has a lot to do with the news, but it's also just making art. And the point maybe I'd say about it is that I think of it as a new medium. Instead of putting images of paintings or watercolors or etchings or anything like that on in a site, I think of it as the work is done there and belongs there and just exists there. So it's like it's a medium. And it's pretty interesting in that way. And in the process, it opened up a lot of doors because I was working in Photoshop. And there's those of you who do, it's got special kind of tools. You can work fast. You can make a lot of changes. And it's a great medium, really. So it kind of led to these paintings that have a source in the news, and I think of them as news movies. And I like keeping the idea of a narration in a visual work, because it seems to operate as a sort of tension, because it doesn't really belong there. Visual work being visual and being a moment in time and timeless. And narration brings in an element of time, so it creates some tension. And in short, that's what it's really all about, is to create a feeling about the work where it doesn't fit expectations. I think all art depends on that tension. It won't fit in a slot. And so you're going to see it in a fresh way. So I use the idea of the news media and kind of expand it out into thinking of it sort of as a movie with that kind of free narrative about it. and kind of find the form through those components.
Before we open it up for questions, Linda had mentioned something to me after we had finished the video about the Robert Rauschenberg opening and the comment that you heard.
Oh, from his mother?
Yeah, would you repeat that?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me? He was just, during the Robert Rauschenberg opening, his mother came. You know, Rauschenberg's from Port Arthur, and he was from Port Arthur, and his mother was a beautiful white-haired lady, and she came to the opening. It was the first opening that she had ever been to of his, and he had just won the Biennale Painting Prize, the World Biennale Painting Prize, and she didn't have anybody to talk to, so I was just talking to her, and she said, "Is he really that good?" And I, knew exactly where she was coming from, and then she said, all he really wants from me is a carrot cake at Christmas. That's all I do. And that was it.
On that, we'll open it to questions. Yes.
Could you both talk a little bit about editing in your work? I'm thinking of the film and the films that you've done, but also with your paintings, because as narratives, of course, this is a moment within a larger story. So can you talk a little bit about the role that editing plays in the work?
Well, we just go back and forth, if that's what you mean. Oh, that's been done? We just go back and forth together. If we're working on a video, I have my strong suits and he has his, and we kind of bang it around. And we do the same with paintings. If we're building a painting, we do the same thing. A lot of times he's really, I guess, a more graphic, perhaps, more, and mine is really more color, and so we have our strong points, and sometimes when we can agree, well then, I don't know what else you could say about it. Do you have anything specific more than that?
I'm thinking about, how, for example, you said you make up this narrative. When you're doing that, are you thinking about what happens before and after the moment that you decide to paint? You playing out the full story and choosing a scene from that story to paint?
No.
How does that work?
No, as far as my work goes, no. I just, I don't know. I start anywhere you can start. I may have a figure that I put in and part of a landscape, and then I just kind of let it fall where it's going to go. And I'll see a mark up there that looks like it. Hey, that looks like a rock. And then usually my ideas are the worst, they're the best when I find them, and I might see something somewhere that I can add. It's just a linear thing, like in that, the horse guy. So I think that, and they're constantly painted over and over and over again. There's lots and lots of layers on there, so a lot of quick decisions, and I just kind of have to find them. I found that if I paint something literally like a real cloud or a real mountain, they're always second rate. They have to come from somewhere else, not just I'll look at that and I'll paint it, because that makes it, I guess, more literal, more narrative in what I'm considering narrative. So I don't like that. I like to let it find me rather than me find it somehow.
Well, in that painting, for example, Linda, I'm thinking about what I see as being sort of ghost figures.
Yeah, they were there at one point, and then they're underneath now. Snow.
Well, I'm not sure. Does that I'm not sure I got the very first part of your question.
Well, I'm asking about editing, you know, the notion of editing, like you made a lot of decisions of what to leave out as much as what to put into that painting, and then the same thing with your films.
Yeah, editing, I missed that. I'm following that. Yeah, it's really going to be a pretty interestingly similar answer, that this thing about, we call it spontaneity, also you could call it randomness, is a most interesting factor to me in art and painting. And I'd paraphrase this by saying that there's so many ways to make good art. And so what we're talking about is what we've gravitated toward, our art. But there's something about random, particularly when it's combined. It's like somebody's doing something specific, and it's got a narrative connected to it, and it's still got a degree of random to it. That is a really interesting place to me. And part of what random is it, I think it's a way to make something visual, make it as clear as possible. A random mark is the most two-dimensional mark that you can come up with, because it's right there on the surface, and it just is what it is. And 2D translates directly into clarity to me. So there's a kind of equation there. So I'm always just kind of going with those components and trying to get get things to happen in that combination. And that's where I think I would say the answer about editing lies right in there.
And also, I think randomness takes it off yourself so much, so you're not personally making this. It's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah.
I want that back.
Yep. Opens the door.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you each talk about how you sort of let the paint do its own thing, as you will, or randomness. What would be about, like, I guess the relationship between what is planned and what isn't planned with y'all's individual work? Where would you say about that line would fall? Does it kind of vary between each painting, between what's planned and what's not?
Yeah, it does. And I think artists operate in that area. And sometimes it's more planned, and you follow your plan. But Linda was talking about things are not usually as interesting or have life in them as much when you're planning them. For me anyway, and I think for her probably too. So yeah, that's a nice thing about it, and the challenge is that you've got kind of a way you're approaching it, but you don't really have a way that you know it's going to work, a system. You don't really have that. And I think that's one of the great things about making art is you're in that position. And it makes it sort of uneasy in a way, but the payoff is real big because it's going to surprise you. And if it surprises you, it's going to be that way for somebody looking at it.
But still, it has to have a form to give it a kind of classical coherence, when you get through with everything. Yeah. I mean, so you're still editing at the end. It may have all this random stuff in it, but it still has to feel absolutely perfect on that canvas.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's right. There's a lot back there in the back of your mind, and I know people who do art, you understand that somebody will sometimes ask somebody while they're doing art, what are you thinking about? They're in the middle of this painting. What are you thinking about? And they'll often just say, oh, nothing, really. I'm just painting. But there's so much going on. There's so much that you're thinking about, that you're aware of. And then you do reach something where it all comes together some way. And the closest I've been able to come to, I'll say this real quick. The closest I've ever been able to come to an idea of how do you decide if a painting is finished is I grew up in the Panhandle, and the sky's real big up there, and it's really expansive feeling. And so I realized some years back that when I was looking at a painting, if it finally looked like the Panhandle, no matter what the subject was in it, that I would say, oh yeah, it's working now. It's good.
Any other questions? Yes, Jenny.
So, I'm a little ashamed to say I didn't know about the email gallery, but I'm really curious about this idea, the concept of being able to reach out to somebody via the internet, share a painting with them, and accept that sooner or later they're going to delete it. And what that means to you, and it feels there's something in my brain that thinks that that question relates to both of your work in some kind of sense of time and experience, but I'm not smart enough to figure that out.
Well, okay. Yeah, I hear. I think I'm following your point there, and I don't know, maybe, but it seems like it's the idea that you're making this art, you're making these images, and they're operating as art, and there's a lot of ways that can end up, and it can be a painting that's this physical thing, and you hope it ends up somewhere in a nice place that people can look at it. But there's also a way of doing art where it's more ephemeral. It doesn't have that long a life. Or there's just some unknowns about that part. But you make it and give it a shape and put it out, and you know it's available for a time and maybe longer. And I don't know if I'm answering you, but I think that's what's behind it with me. It's just the idea that you're making art. And this little thing that I'm doing, it's sort of like it's like a show. You know, artists are always trying to figure out how to be artists in this world. And there's a lot of ways to do it in galleries. That's a good way, of course. Museum shows, excellent. But you just find other ways. So this is like kind of an ongoing show. I'm not sure I really answered you.
It kind of reminds me of the project. I don't know if it's ongoing, but years ago you would do those sort of trading cards, and they were gifts essentially. At least I thought of them, and I've thought about this project as a kind of gift you're doing. I mean, I'm not deleting mine. I'm making a book out of them, but that idea. Can you talk a little bit about this? They used to, every once in a while, you would get something handmade, little card. And it would be, the one I always remember I mentioned to you was Spade Cooley, who was a country western singer that was big in Los Angeles. And I received one from them. And it said, "Best wishes, Spade Cooley." And what is this about? And the show at Tyler had a whole bunch of those, which was neat to see. Does that relate at all to what you're doing?
Oh, I think so. They're the cards are just kind of, in a way, they're kind of throwaway. They're just small little drawings that Ed does, the kind of a random drawing that he thinks feels like somebody in the country and western singer from the 40s to the 90s, and then I will do the watercolor on it, and it'll just say famous country western singers, and then on the back he might write a little comment about them, saying, you know, something really general, you know, like had a couple of hits during the 70s or something, you know. And they're just, you know, they're just kind of throwaway drawings, and then we usually, after they're watercolored, we have them laminated, and we've given them away for years, and in fact we just made some more because they're so much fun to do, and they're just kind of, they're fun to do and they're fun to give away. So they're, in that sense, they're related in that they come from us and they go out and they can mean something to somebody or not. Isn't that what you think?
Yeah, maybe it's pretty kin to music too, you know? People just play music and whoever's there and whoever's hearing it, well, there it is.
Yeah.
And visual art has some other edges to it, but it can kind of operate that way a bit, yeah.
Any other questions? Well, I just want to say, oh, Ann, go ahead.
So I was really struck by the role the museum played in the video. And I was thinking, well, of course, you know, it's a place you go to see other images, but it also seemed like a space of collaboration. You met people that you went off and did other projects with. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about the museum not just as a collection, but as a kind of magnet for other people that you would collaborate with.
You mean for us or for Mark?
How about all of you?
Well, yeah, I think that people come to the museum and see something, and it inspires them to do something, or it inspires them to curate something, or, I mean, that's just the way it goes. That's the way it goes out, and that's the way it should go out. And I think this museum has certainly used that. Particularly, I mean, in the olden days, they did more regional stuff, I think, than they do now. But that was then, and this is now. And maybe we've just become more national. But I think things do still go out in various ways. And I think that we appreciate the museum. I mean, we all do, having this institution and having the opportunity to be with it. Do you want to say anything about that?
That's Mark.
You want to say something about it?
No. No, it's a great resource. And part of the impetus behind this is the 125th year anniversary of the founding of the Fort Worth Art Association, which is the oldest museum association in Texas. And so we were sort of, because we've been involved in various ways. I mean, Linda mentioned she wore a number of hats. Well, the number of hats was really quite extraordinary that she wore. And Ed was a guard, and you were saying how you had the key and you would come in at night and, you know, look at the art and do drawings, and no one was bothering you and that sort of thing. I was also thinking about it because I'm working with students on a project, the work of Maki Trotter, who taught at TCU for a long time. And he was a mainstay of the Art Center School for a lot of years. So that kind of collaboration has, you know, been part of this museum certainly for a very long time.
Yeah.
Okay, is that it?
One last question, or if anybody else's, but to kind of tag on to Ann's question, I was sort of struck by how much you devoted your presentation to the museum as well. And I know that the museum story is in part your story. That's what I got from it. But when you were back then, were you aware of what was happening, how your career was developing, your life was developing? Were you conscious of that? Because you were photographing. I mean, would it have ever occurred to you back then that someday you would be sitting in this auditorium showing a film of your youthful days at the Modern, you know?
Never.
But you still had that material to work from. So some part of you collected that material.
That's right, yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
I think you just, at the time, you can't be objective about what's going on or where you're going or what you're doing even.
You might say also in regards to that the museum played quite a role for us, and I think for a number of artists during that time that we would know. Because, I mean, it's a place where the best art around, you go there to see it. And the people that work there, you find out are really smart people. They're some of the best people around about knowing about art. And so artists get jobs there, and work, and make contacts. And it was a great resource for us. It was just kind of a center in a way that we were connected with. Because it was our jobs, that was part of it. But there was a time, this will be real quick, dude. There was a time where we were actually thinking, we've got to get to another place, another area, that so our art can go out to a wider audience. And it was right about then that Henry Hopkins came. And the whole kind of thing shifted. Instead of being an art center, it became an art museum. And he started bringing in national, international people. And so we were, still working there and sort of watching all that happen. And then we were fortunate enough to get to be part of some things that were happening. So it just kind of evolved, And it was, to this day, it feels like it was a very fortunate situation for us. We just got so much from that connection, and still do. Here we are tonight doing this, and it's a lot of fun. It's great.
Okay, you want to cut it off?
Cut it off, she says. It was always my goal, so. I want to thank Ed and Linda. It was a joy for me to work with them. It always is, and I'm so glad that you offered that opportunity. It was really fun. And thank you all for coming. Good night.